Hi, I'm Leanne Brensinger. I'm going to talk to you about complex childhood trauma, or ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and the brain. There are any number of things that can cause childhood trauma. Motor vehicle accidents, physical, sexual, and emotional abuse and neglect are just a part of the traumatic experiences that can cause post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic stress symptoms. The National Institutes of Health say that childhood trauma can actually be regarded as a developmental disorder. And that's very important for those of us that work with students because it means that trauma can mask as a learning disorder. And we'll talk about why that might be in a little while. Also, to consider marginalized students, such as children of color or poverty, LGBTQIA2S plus students, and disabled youth, and how trauma can compound that issue with them as well. I'd like to show you some statistics on trauma from the US Department of Health and Human Services. And more than 2/3 of children reported at least one traumatic event, like witnessing or experienced domestic violence or physical or sexual assault or neglect by age 16. 1 in 7 children have experienced child abuse and or neglect in the past year, and 8% of high school students had been in a physical fight on school property within the 12 months of the survey. And so those are the students that we work with every day. It's really important for us to know these things. You're probably familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, but I'm going to just show you a little bit of a video to give you a small refresher, and that's going to be important for us
Maslow's
later.
hierarchy of needs is a theory in psychology.
The reason that Maslow is important is because when we look at the trauma brain, we can see that the hierarchy has kind of been flipped upside down. So in typical development, survival is at the bottom, the survival needs are taken care of, people feel safe, and so cognition can take over more of the brain, and the neocortex can work effectively. But in trauma, the trauma brain, the survival is the most important part. And so it's important for us to know that children that have undergone trauma, humans that have undergone trauma, are really working in survival brain. They're working in their reptilian brain. And cognition and the neocortex is not going to work as well. There are physical effects to the brain when you're under stress. And this is another short video that will explain a little bit of that.
Are you sleeping restlessly?
And again, that's really important because we're going to look at children of trauma and see that their brain has actually been changed by the stress in their lives. Stress and trauma can also impact DNA. And they found that in mice that lived in traumatic situations, they literally passed the stress in their DNA to their children. So, in addition to any kind of institutional or systematic or societal trauma, it can also be impacted in our DNA, and that can change us physically. It can cause more health issues as well. So it's important for us to address trauma. And Dr. Sean Ginwright, who works with urban youth, understands that acknowledging childhood trauma is a first step, but he goes beyond that. And he believes that we need to create healing centered communities, environments where children feel safe, not to excuse their behavior, but to help them take that safety and rearrange their behavior with the knowledge that they're in a safe space. What might that look like? Well, one little activity that I sometimes encourage my students to do is to think about how their bodies feel when they're under stress and how their minds feel, and to connect those two things so that when they know why they feel that way, they might be able to actually change the way they feel. The state of New Jersey also has trauma informed and healing centered practices. And there's a whole set of resources, including helping children and youth cope after a disaster or a traumatic event or a pandemic, and how to integrate mindfulness into education. So ACEs and HCE training in schools inform staff members how to recognize and deal with um, children of trauma. You may have heard speaker Josh Shipp. If not, you've probably heard of his one caring adult idea, and it's very true. Children that have one caring adult anywhere, whether it's in the band room or on the playing field or in the classroom, are much less likely to self harm and to get in trouble. Children with healthy emotional intelligence, bolstered by a good social emotional learning program, can encourage resilience. It can encourage children to feel other people's pain, to acknowledge it, and then reflect on how to make both lives better. We have very little control over whether our students will experience trauma, but having a healing centered classroom or building or district can help lessen the impact that trauma has on ours and our children's lives. I have one more little video before I end, and it's a little lesson on resilience, and I think it's something that both you and your students might enjoy watching. Thank you very much. I'm Leanne Brensinger. This was my presentation on trauma and the brain. I have all the resources for you if you are interested in them, and please reach out to me at any point that you need it. Thank you very much. Have a great day.